welcome to a very special episode of A Lost Cause. This is such a special episode because it is our very first guest, Don Sparrow, who is Annie's dad and my brother. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And actually, our special guest today was the first member of the Sparrow family to get on board with Lost, because even before the show had aired, he attended a panel. Was it like 2004?
2004, San Diego Comic-Con. They had a preview panel of Lost. I attended because I was a huge fan of Alias by J.J. Abrams, and they really did blanket. They made Lost very enticing at the convention. As you went in, they had missing posters for all of the cast, and you really couldn't ignore it. And so then I kind of went, oh, I'll check that out. And so they showed us an unedited pilot, which ended. It had no special effects, but it ended when Kate does her, fearful countdown.
Right.
And then that's where it ended. So I thought, oh, that's where the pilot ended. Not realizing it went on from there. But
And you thought it was pretty good.
I thought it was amazing. I came back and I said, oh, everyone needs to see the show. It's like a movie. It's better than a movie. And of course, at the panel, every single question was, what kind of dinosaurs is it? And then it's not dinosaurs, and they'd be like, not dinosaurs. So the panel was interesting that way.
And you watched it like pretty much from the start, and we didn't miss an episode.
Never, yeah, no, it was right from the jump.
Well, today's episode, as you can probably tell, we are talking about the one and only John Locke. So, why do we love John Locke?
Good question. Why don't we love John Locke?
Well, I love John Locke more than you.
Yeah.
John Locke is probably, it's hard to say, might be my favorite character, but then I think it's probably Desmond, but close second. Mm-hmm. And why do you love John Locke?
Well, I'm sort of previewing my hot take a little later, but John Locke is, same as he saw the heart of the island, he is the heart of the show. He is kind of the point of view character. He is the first sort of adherent of the island, and as zealous and sort of unbound as he seems in the early ones with his sort of implacable faith in the island, the viewer goes along on that journey and ends up where John Locke begins, and sort of becomes convinced has faith in faith in general, but also in the island.
That's deep. You're good at this.
Well, I love John Locke for similar reasons because, and we'll talk more about this later, that he is a man of faith, and just such a believer. Like, he's just a believer in the island, in people. I like that he's always very courteous, strong, brave.
Too forgiving.
Yeah.
He does seek in the same way that the island does in its I get nervous using the word purgatory, but in its purgatory-like way of refocusing and redeeming characters, he himself gives people opportunities to do that throughout the show.
Yeah, that's true. And he's, I think, always, and maybe to his detriment, looking for the best in others. Mm-hmm. And so, this is true of any character, but, would you agree that, in particular, John Locke's strengths are often kind of also his weaknesses? Like, for example, his faith sort of makes him vulnerable. And there's that episode where he's kind of labeled as being vulnerable to coercion and, manipulated. And he is manipulated a lot. His zealousness you talked about sometimes becomes obsessive and can be hurtful in that way too. So
yes, he doesn't give up on people, which is we would think of as a good quality, but then that also means that stubbornness can leads him into trouble as well.
And even his catchphrase,
don't tell me what I can't do.
Yeah, don't tell me what I can't do. At times, that's wonderful, right? Because it spurs him on and, makes him so tenacious. But at other times just seems like stupid stubbornness, right? Just you got to accept your limitations and...
Yes, pointless stubbornness.
Yeah, and kind of, live in reality. So there's sort of that duality. But that kind of, leads us to... the whole idea, and it's like there's even an episode kind of focused on this, of, John being the man of faith, and then Jack being the man of science. And so what were your views on that whole kind of dichotomy?
Well, it was also sort of a meta statement for the audience, I think, because the show itself had to decide what it was about, and who was the actual, natural leader, not just of the island, but of the show. And that was intention, basically through all 6 seasons. And they were such good representatives of those halves, for those reasons you just highlighted, because they are so flawed. They're not. If it was easy, like if it was, clearly Jack always makes the right decision and nothing bad ever happens. Clearly being a man of science is the way to go. But of course, Jack, like Locke, is very flawed, and similarly Locke, with his blind faith, isn't a perfect representation either.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, my hot take for the Jack podcast was that Jack never made the right decisions, so I would totally be Team Locke with the man of faith, just because I am one.
Yeah, although it's interesting that, like, through the arc of the show, by the final season, Jack is actually a man of faith too, right? Because he pretty much comes to see that, John was right about a lot of things. But it's interesting how the show seems to kind of keep setting up these rivalries with Jack. Like, there's Jack and Sawyer, and then Jack and Locke. And I mean, Jack being like the main character, the protagonist, it's sort of unfortunate because, like, he should sort of be the one that people support and favor. But, I think in those two examples, like, Sawyer is so charismatic. Locke, is so sympathetic, and kind of inspiring that you sort of find yourself leaning towards them. Which is maybe one of the problems with the show, and I was actually telling Annie that I came across this ranker poll, and it was like the top 10 main characters of a show that were actually like the worst part of the show.
Right.
And I think Jack Shepherd was like, he was on the list anyway. He wasn't number one, but so, that's kind of an interesting thing that keeps happening, and it sort of makes me wonder if, to sort of maybe like dampen the enthusiasm for Sawyer and for Locke, we do see them become a bit more flawed. And like certainly with Locke, that first season he's almost like a superhero, right? And Charlie's like, oh, if there's anyone on this island I would listen to or trust, it would be John Locke. But then, by the second season we see him kind of lose his footing a bit.
Because of Boone, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's several examples where he is, again, has that blind faith, but also this sort of, this trust that thing, to find meaning in things that where there may not be meaning, like the hatch or the, even at personal, like he slides down and cuts his hands, and, like he's sort of more thoughtless and more impulsive, which he really wasn't when he was at his best in the first season.
Yeah. And it seemed like, in that first season, it was really legitimate. Like, he knew what he was talking about and he knew what he was doing. And then after a while, you start to wonder if it is kind of just bravado, and maybe he's not so sure after all. And then, of course, the whole kind of crisis of faith with pushing the button. And this was, he believed, that it was his destiny to get into that hatch, and then it was his destiny to push the button. And I mean, he was right, but he does have that crisis of faith. And it's all Ben's fault, really.
Whoa, we don't want to do that.
But I mean, well, we can get into this a bit more later, but like, just Ben knows how to play Locke like an instrument.
Yes, and again, it is sort of allegorical of, Ben in that scenario anyway was sort of the serpent in Locke's garden, right? The island is this pristine garden where he can sort of commune with this special force, and then everything that Ben Linus says to him undermines that, undermines his specialness, undermines his communion, undermines his purpose, until he's sort of, well, why can't we eat the fruit of the tree? You know,
Yeah.
why can't we? Why do I have to push the button? This is all just a show. And sort of that knowledge of of good and evil ends up being, people are harmed because of the crisis of faith.
Yes.
Though, I mean, it's difficult to say that because it brings about, these changes in other characters, and what happens to Desmond is necessary
Right.
for the end game of the show. So so it's hard to say what his purpose was. Maybe even his doubt was part of his purpose.
Right. But, Ben definitely plants kind of that fear that I think any person of faith, it's sort of there. Like, what if none of it's real? What if none of it's true? What if, I've been doing all this for nothing, right?
Particularly for someone who has been through versions of that
Yes.
so frequently in his life, of feeling a fool
Yes.
for seeking family, seeking purpose, seeking community.
And for believing, like over and over again.
Yeah.
He's kind of a fool for believing in his dad. He's a fool for like believing in this, guy he picks up on the side of the road that he becomes a father figure to, like, and again, he's just made to be such a fool, and yet he keeps believing and keeps trying. So in the Enneagram, there's lots of different numbers, and Annie and I think that Locke is a 4, like we're 4s. And one of the kind of defining characteristics of a 4 is that they need to feel they are special. And so that's definitely true of John Locke. Like, he needs to believe that he's special. And this is really like kind of some of the jealousy between Ben and Locke, right? And so I think there's that question, though, like, is Locke really special? Or is it just, we think he's special because of the time travel factor, and like Richard saw him in the 1950s and then follows him throughout his life, believing, well, this is a special man. But then at one point says, I don't really see anything very remarkable about him. So is John Locke special?
I think he is, because we know he's been observed, like the other candidates, by Jacob, and he sees something in him. Is he not, maybe I'm mistaken, is he not the lowest number?
I think so, right?
4.
He's the first number.
No,
He's the first number.
Is
So
he?
he's-
I think so.
So I mean, that to me indicates kind of well, maybe not, but it hints at a purity and a maybe an opportunity for him to be kind of the prime candidate in Jacob's view, as a replacement. So I do think he's special, even above the machinations of the time travel and different elements, which we come to realize weren't really, that those were being manipulated by a malevolent force.
Yes.
And not John Locke's purpose or Jacob's actions at all. So even putting those aside and the time travel element aside, I do think that John Locke's his unique story and his unique capacity make him special. I mean, because he did hear
Yes.
the words that Ben Linus couldn't.
Yeah.
And whether that was Jacob or the malevolent force, we don't know for sure. But even so, it speaks to his specialness, because then, well, that's why the dark force he's the first person he wants to get rid of and manipulate, because he's the greatest threat to him.
I agree that John Locke is special. He's immediately healed by the island when the plane crashes. And he does have this just special, like, understanding and communion with the island. And so, like, that's what makes him special, I think, that he can see that. And it's sort of like he's favored by the island, I guess, in some sort of way. Like, he does get these visions. He does get, have this kind of knowledge that he couldn't sort of attain himself. So, yes, I think that John Locke is special. What do you think?
One thing I wanted to bring up was when he's a kid and he he drew the smoke monster attacking that guy. We didn't ever get an explanation for that, did we?
No, I mean, we do know, I mean, from later or from around that time, that he does like fantasy stories and he likes science fiction and sort of comic book pulp stories. So that could have been just that sort of sense of adventure, but it also could have been some sort of Walt-like preview or manifestation.
I think that it is kind of like that because Richard is so like intrigued by that, which comes up sometimes.
And I think we've talked about this in previous episodes that like time on Lost, even before the time travel element, like it's not totally linear, right? Like you sort of have these kind of where the present and the future kind of merge, and so maybe there's a bit of that there too. And I think that, you know, Ben, even though he tells Locke, you're not special, which is like the worst thing that anyone could ever say to Locke, and the worst thing anyone can ever say to Ben, like which is probably why he picks that arrow. But he says it because he does know that Locke is special.
I thought he did say that he is special.
Well, he later he did.
He goes, I remember when I was special, like,
you
know, and which is very, I mean, again, I tend to look through the prism of biblical scripture, and in that sense, Ben Linus does seem to be sort of a Saul, you know, like he was God, he was anointed, he was the rightful, you know, rightful king, but he lost favor. He didn't lead well. He didn't you know, he lived selfishly, and used the island to serve himself rather than serving the island, and so the
kingdom was torn
from
him.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But I think like one of the best parts of the show, although it's frustrating to watch, is the way that Ben and Locke, and so those two actors, Terry O'Quinn and Michael Emerson, like play off each other is just, it's just incredible. And, you know, particularly like where Ben is, we think that he's Henry Gale, and he's just kind of dropping these little bombs, you know, like, well, if I was one of these others, you know, and just, again, planting those seeds of doubt, or like, I don't know why you let the doctor talk to you that way, like, just, you know, kind of setting the scene. But it is quite wonderful to watch, actually.
Well, there's no question those are the two most gifted actors on a very gifted cast.
Yeah.
And they can do so much and so compellingly, and playing different shades. You know, the way that Ben Linus first plays Henry Gale as this sort of meek, you know, everyman. So he's, you know, you're watching someone acting as an actor,
right?
You know, and sort of this, you know, game within a game. And it's the same as John Locke, where he also plays shades of the same character, where, you know, on Island, Locke is one thing. Did I say Jack? I'm going to say Locke.
No.
On Island is, you know, as he's established. Then we see the flashback immediately where he's sort of this, you think immediately, oh, he really is a military strategist. No, he's like a loser at a paper company, you know. And with this kind of mundane job and this more vulnerable, insecure version of himself. Then we have the, you know, later on when he's no longer himself, we have this, you know, sort of ultra confident, purposeful John Locke, which I just learned a little behind the scenes. He was never told who he was playing. He still in season 5.
Like the Man in Black, you mean? Like
yeah. So in season 5, where we have the resurrected John Locke, he was told it's John Locke at full confidence, believing himself invincible. And that was his motivation. And then it was only season 6 that the actor was told, no, you're actually a different being.
Wow.
And so,
I didn't know
so again,
that.
it's like, and all these performances within one character, which really I don't know that other than someone like Michael Emerson, if any other actor could have pulled off that many shades.
Definitely. And, you know, it's probably appropriate that those are the only two, like the Emmy nominations for the show, those are the only two. No, that's not right, actually. Other actors were nominated. Those are the only two winners. So I believe Terry O'Quinn won twice, and then Michael Emerson won once. And like, once Michael Emerson joined the show, it was always the two of them kind of battling it out for the Emmy, for sure. But I feel like, you know, it's true of some characters that they just couldn't be played by anybody else. Like I think that about, you know, Michael Scott, for example. Like, just Steve Carell had to be Michael Scott.
Yeah.
But on Lost, and like you said, it's a great cast and, you know, lots of good performances. But I can't imagine there being another John Locke or a different Ben Linus. Like, it just couldn't be, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked a little bit about, like, Locke's weaknesses and, that sometimes he's not so sure of himself. But in the end, like, he was right about a lot of things. He was right about pushing the button, and he was right about the freighter.
Oh,
And,
hate the freighter.
and he was right that they were supposed to come back to the island.
Well, I just think that if they had all listened to Locke,
Right.
none of it would have happened. Like, because the Oceanic Six leave the island, but then they come right back and mess things up, and then there's
So they shouldn't have
Flock,
left in the
fake
first
Locke.
place.
Then there's Flock, and there wouldn't be Flock if Jack hadn't called the freighter. Like, they just should have listened to John.
Well, that's an interesting hypothesis, or, like, thesis. Like, how the show would be different if everyone just listened to Locke, like, in the first place, right?
Well, and I think, we've seen the way that the island will try to achieve its ends, where it's like
Right.
Ben Linus was erring and, no longer a good leader, and then so the island lost its healing properties for him, and in fact he got, spinal tumors and things. And the same thing happened with right at the cusp of Jack getting his people
Right.
off the island, which he believed to be his purpose. He got appendicitis and was very ill himself. So it's sort of the subtle way of where it's, no, you're on the wrong path. You're doing it. So it does seem to be that the island. I don't know for sure that Locke's interpretation is necessarily correct, but certainly those actions that were taken weren't what the island intended, because it didn't work out for any of them, and it wasn't until they put themselves on a different path that the way became a lot easier.
Yeah, it's just like one of my frustrations is that, he's never fully vindicated. Like, and when you think that you're looking at the resurrected Locke, it's like at first you're so happy because you're like, oh, he's back on the island, where he wants to be, where he belongs, and he was right. But the truth is, like, the real John Locke died, believing that he had failed. And if you believe what the man in black says, that, like, the last thought that crossed his mind was, like, I don't understand, right? And we kind of see that happen with Locke again and again, like where he's yelling into the window of the hatch, like, I did everything I was supposed to, like, I don't understand. And then at the end, believing that, he was meant to bring everybody back and had failed in doing so. So I wish that he had, been vindicated, or just the end of his life just is so tragic that it bothers me.
Yeah, she talks about it a lot.
It is very troubling, and I mean, I guess that's why we can appreciate the Sideways universe, because they do seem to eventually have a clarity there, and an appreciation for each other, and some forgiveness and redemption that we don't see on Island.
Yeah. Yes. And then, if you think about it too, like, there's a lot of sort of Christ figures on the show, in the sense of they're willing to sacrifice themselves. Like, Desmond is a really good example. But even John Locke, like, he doesn't want to leave the island. I mean, that's the last thing in the world he wants. And like, he can't even relate to, like, this struggle to get off the island. And yet he willingly leaves the island to bring them back, and believing that is necessary for the good of the island. And then he doesn't get to come back, which is the sad part.
Well,
it does, yeah. There is no perfect Christ allegory in the story, but I would say John Locke is the closest, because he does sacrifice his own life to achieve the ends that are intended to be achieved. But in the same way, that only Christ can resurrect, which I did think of that as happy as I was in season 5, where I thought we had a resurrected John Locke. I thought, this is pretty dicey.
Yeah.
Like, this is pretty special now. someone being healed is
Right.
pretty different than someone sort of self-resurrecting.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so I was sort of as disappointed as I was, as you say, for the actual arc of what John Locke's life was. I was like, okay, that's probably a little
Kind of
tamer.
relieved.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny because, it should be clear, like when Ben says to Son, like, dead is dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I've seen this island do a lot of things, but like I've never seen it bring someone back to life,
Mm-hmm.
and so it should kind of clue us in, like, yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. Maybe you guys would, but did I believe that it was John Locke when I was watching?
There was no reason not to.
But I think you did guess before it was revealed, as I recall. I think
Yeah, I think that was one of the points.
One of
I
those
got.
like, oh wow, Definitely, yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about Locke's key relationships in his life, which are also kind of his heartaches in a sense. So there's Helen, who was the love of his life, and he was really happy with her, and she truly loved him. And then, of course, like the relationship ended, because of his, I don't know, like inability to let go of his father. So Annie, why don't you explain a little bit about John Locke's father and like his sort of background?
Well, he is a con artist.
Yes.
What's his name?
Well, oh yeah, what is his name?
Cooper.
Cooper, Anthony Cooper. Yeah.
Yeah, right. He was the person who is responsible for the killing of Sawyer's parents.
Right, which we talked about in our last episode, or 2 episodes ago, yeah.
He conned Sawyer's mom and slept with her, and then the dad got mad, killed her, and then killed himself. And so, ever since then, the fake name for Anthony Cooper was Sawyer in that con, so then Sawyer became that Sawyer.
Right.
And he was trying to find him. And then in the meantime,
like
Anthony,
how does he first con his own son?
I was getting to that.
Yeah.
He steals John Locke's kidney. Okay, so John Locke has always wanted to meet his father, right? And so then he finally does. And pretty much. And then Anthony is like, oh, I'm gonna die, I need a kidney. And then John Locke is like, well, I'll give you mine. And then he does.
Yeah.
And then, flash forward, I don't know how long, and then there's this, like, teenager who comes to John Locke and is like, this guy is going to con my mom, and they're getting married, and I want to know if you know anything about him. And John Locke kind of helps him. And then the kid dies, and so John Locke goes to his father, and he's like, what are you doing? This is terrible. And then his father proceeds to throw him out an 8-story building. Yeah. And that is how he ends up in the wheelchair.
That's right. So really, like, all of Locke's tragedies, it's kind of his father's responsible. And then, like, with Helen, like, he meets Helen actually in a sort of therapy group, and, he can't let go of his anger for what his father did to him. And he meets Helen, and they fall in love, and Helen just wants him to, like, let it go and, forget about him, but he can't, and he's, like, hanging around outside his place, and then his dad comes to him again and needs his help, and like, Locke can't resist helping him, and then Helen finds out and breaks off their relationship.
And he's so obsessed that we don't know how he ends up there, but when Anthony Cooper ends up on the island, John Locke can't kill him.
Yeah. So he
has
never
to
really
get Sawyer
does
to do
overcome that, but
which is insane. I mean,
but again, it's sort of like one of his good qualities, kind of that double-edged sword, right? Like that his capacity for forgiveness and believing that people can be redeemed is a good thing, but it does hurt him.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess you could also say that, like, if John Locke was meant to come to the island, Like, he probably wouldn't have if all of that bad stuff hadn't happened, right? Like,
That's true. If he was satisfied in his, no candidate had a satisfactory life. Yeah.
And, you know, the only reason he went on that walkabout was to prove that he could do it. You know, don't tell me what I can't do. So, I mean, and he just
and that's how it started.
Yeah, and he wouldn't have been in that situation if he hadn't had so much loss. But I think, like, we talked about the acting ability of Terry O'Quinn, and it's just like, he's a very good actor at depicting suffering, because I just find, like, just the expression of whether it's emotional suffering or, like, the physical suffering when he's, you know, trying to, like, get in rehab after falling out of that window. It's just so palpable, and it just makes my heart go out to him. And that's one of the reasons that I only want good things for John Locke. And I guess another way that John Locke is special, right, is, you know, he's told over and over again, even though he's so despondent and has, like, completely given up and depressed, you know, the police officers and everyone tell him, like, you're lucky to be alive. Like, it's a miracle that you even survived that fall. So.
And it was.
And it was.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, you know, really the heart of what I love about John Locke, is he believes in miracles. And then I'd like to talk, I know we're running out of time a little bit, but just about Sideways Locke, because I feel like, well, I think, Annie, your comment was that's sort of the best of all the Locks. So.
Because he's happy. I don't know. I just like it. I love the Sideways because everybody's happy. Well, mostly everybody. But, and John Locke was one of the, really got, like, peace in the end.
And a lot of the things that were wrong are kind of made right. You know, like, his relationship with Ben, he's, like, Ben's a teacher at the school that he's subbing at, you know, they become friends.
And that was a great friendship, too.
Yeah.
That was, like,
Ben actually defends him and, like, tries to prevent him from getting hurt, and, like, gets injured himself in trying to protect John Locke. So, like, that's, like, you know, bizarro world, right?
And then,
and he's with Helen.
Yeah, okay.
And what else?
Well, that's it. That's all I had. So
something else.
Yeah, he's capable of letting go. Like, he doesn't pursue things that nag at him. He just is content enough to let things go.
And his dad isn't a villain in the Sideways.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was kind of weird. Same with the Charles Widmore thing. Those are two things
that are very
weirded
very different.
Me out.
And yes, he's in a wheelchair, but then, you know, he's
fixes
willing.
him,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. And so Jack gets to fix him. Yeah. And I mean, that's one of my favorite moments. Is, of course, sort of reconciliation, I guess, between Jack and Locke and the Sideways, and that, you know, Jack on the island just always seems so annoyed with Locke and so irritated by Locke. And yet when Locke comes to his office to talk about this potential surgery, you know, Jack's laughing his jokes and, like, really genuinely seems to like him. And it kind of makes you wonder, you know, in a different world, if they could have been good friends. Well, I believe we are ready for our favorite part of the show, which is the hot take. And because we have a special guest with us this evening, Donnie is going to do the hot take.
Yes, so I've kind of hinted at it because of the nature of the first question I was asked. But my hot take is that John Locke and not Jack is the main character of the show. That really, I mean, when people talk about the show, when there's merchandise from the show, when there's memories from the show, it's very rarely a Jack moment that people are talking about, a Jack memory. John Locke represents this show to people and in their hearts. And I actually think that Jack gets a bad rap. I'm looking forward to when you do the Jack episode because I have lots of things to say. But I do think that he's got a little bit of, like, frontrunner syndrome, where it's, you know, the show is unfair. Like, because he's the straight man who holds it together, he can be kind of unsung. But enough about that. We'll save that for that other episode. But I do think that that John Locke is more compelling. Obviously, he's a better performer, as good as Matthew Fox is. But also, I think even the foibles and the frailties of John Locke are more recognizable and more relatable. And so that is my hot take, is that he isn't just sort of the representative character. He is the main character of
Locke.
Oh,
Twist ending.
bold.
My Sawyer hot take was that Sawyer should be the main character. So but you're kind of just
There you go.
blowing that all away.
Well, this is like highly irregular because we usually don't have a special guest and only one hot take. But my, like, not so much a hot take.
Okay, so everyone but me, the hot take person.
Go ahead, like,
Okay.
you know. But my hot take is that if things had worked out differently, I think that the John Locke's, like, ultimate role would have been kind of in that number 2 position. I don't know if John Locke is really, like, the best leader. Like, as great as he is, he does seem to be indecisive at times. You know, maybe he gives people too many second chances. But I think he would be an excellent number 2 because he's loyal, he gives really wise counsel. And so
tell me, Shawna, who would be number 1 then? Tell me.
I think that what was supposed to happen, you know, Ben should have been the number 1, but he was undermined by his own crippling jealousy.
Okay. Okay. You know what? Like, okay, all Ben has ever done is just listening to Jacob. That's all he's ever done.
But seeing how we're talking, this is the John Locke episode, I would point out that Ben killed Locke twice, so there is that as well. But I think he meant it when he said, I will miss you. Like, I think he genuinely, you know, Ben's always lying, but I think that was actually true.
And then we were kind of arguing about this before. So what did you think? You were talking about Richard. And
well, yeah, we
on...
could probably save that for another day, but I feel like Richard was not a very effective number 2, because supposedly, like, we find out that Ben has never seen Jacob, has never heard Jacob's voice, and, you know, Ben keeps saying, like, everything I did what you wanted me to do, like, and I did it for the island, but then he was getting his instructions from Richard, because Richard was the one that was supposedly, you know, able to communicate with Jacob, so something got lost in the translation there.
But I totally agree with you. Locke would be a good number 2.
All right. Well, any final comments about John Locke?
Thank you for having me. And I hope to come on when you record the Jack episode.
Well, we'll keep you posted. Okay. Thanks for joining us for another episode of A Lost Cause.
Okay.
Namaste.
That's my thing. Okay, see you in another life. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.